This year's theme is love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's the second greatest commandment, and it's found all the way back in Leviticus, but it's an age-old commandment. Jesus says that all the law and the prophets hinge on these two commandments: to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Everything that we do is hinged on those two commandments. I married my wife, and I started dating her, and I committed my life to her because she is worth something to me. She has worth, she has value, she has beauty, and she's just incredible. She's not even here, so she can't hear me talking her up. I don't know how many of you have watched the Larry Nassar sentencing over the last couple weeks, but Larry Nassar was the famous U.S. Olympian doctor who was sexually abusing his patients. Most of those with their parents in the same room. He was doing manipulations on them that were not medical. And so there were allegations going back as far as 1997, and people kept covering up for him, and he was a respected doctor, and more victims kept reporting it, and each one of those victims were shut down. Rachael Denhollander, one of his victims, was the first victim to go public and to publicly state her name and to say, I was one of Larry Nassar's victims. It was because of Rachael Denhollander that Larry Nassar is now going to spend the rest of his life in prison. He was given a 40 to 175-year sentence, the maximum allowed as part of his plea deal. At first, they thought there were 88 victims total. We're now up to 260, and that number keeps increasing. I think that's just the tip of the iceberg for the amount of victims that this man has. I want us to watch part of Rachel's impact statement. She was the last person to give a victim impact statement before Judge Rosemary Aquilina in Lansing, Michigan. She was the last one to give a victim impact statement. 156 of his victims gave victim impact statements before the judge. It's unprecedented. Historically, this was a big historical event. It's unprecedented. Rachel stood before the judge, and she gave a 36-minute victim impact statement. I urge you, I encourage you, go back and listen to it. Listen to every single word that this woman has to say. I'm going to play just the last 2 minutes of her victim impact statement right before the judge sentenced Larry Nassar. Well, it didn't start where it was supposed to. Is that volume pushed up? Well, for some reason it's not playing. Did somebody unplug me up here? That's plugged in. Are you positive it's turned up? Whoop. Well, we're not going to get any sound out of it. So, I will tell you what she said. That's a shame. Technology always works until you go to use it. Rachael Denhollander, at the very end of it, actually she started by asking Judge Aquilina, she said, how much is a little girl's life worth? And so that was the theme that carried throughout her victim impact statement. How much are these little girls worth? And so she went through, and then she said, I want you to take a look around this courtroom. After 156 victims gave impact statements, she said, This is what it looks like. When institutions, when churches, when the police, when they protect the good name of somebody, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like. And then at the very end of that, she asked for the maximum sentence for Larry Nassar. And she looked at Judge Aquilina and she said, I asked the question, how much are these little girls worth? Just a powerful, powerful statement. And I was just sobbing when I read this or watched this. I was just sobbing. The story doesn't stop there. Rachael has written a couple articles at least since she gave that victim impact statement. This one is in Christianity Today, and she wrote this 4 days ago. One of the questions, the title of the article, by the way, I encourage you to read this. It's called "My Larry Nassar Testimony Went Viral, but there's more to the gospel than forgiveness." She gave 2 sentences about forgiveness after just hammering him on the justice of God, saying that God is a just God and God will crush you with guilt when you realize the gravity of what you've done, if you ever realize the gravity of what you've done, that God will crush you with the weight of that guilt, and God is a just God, and God will take care of this. God will take care of you because of his justice. And she said, forgiveness requires repentance. And so she just was really bold and just so biblical. And all these churches latched on to this one sentence that she said about forgiveness and started writing all these articles. So she countered this by saying, my Larry Nassar testimony went viral, but there's more to the gospel than forgiveness. And she went on, and this question was asked of Rachael Denhollander. In your impact statement, you mentioned that it took you a long time to reveal your own abuse with other people. Was the church included in that? Here's Rachel's answer. Yes. Church is one of the least safe places to acknowledge abuse because the way it is counseled is, more often than not, damaging to the victim. There is an abhorrent lack of knowledge for the damage and devastation that sexual abuse brings. It is with deep regret that I say the church is one of the worst places to go for help. That's a hard thing to say because I am a very conservative evangelical, but that is the truth. There are very, very few people who have ever found true help in the church. She's 100% right. I wish I could debate with Rachael Denhollander and say, no, that's, the church is a great place for the wounded to come, and it's wonderful, and it's magnificent, and people will find healing through Jesus, but I can't say that because my experience is what Rachel's experience is. As I go around nationally, as I talk to people, as I speak with hundreds of survivors of abuse, they're saying the church was so destructive to my faith. They came in and they blamed me and they said, I'm being unforgiving and I'm being bitter and I'm holding on to this bitterness and why can't I just forgive and move on, and all this garbage theology that they don't acknowledge people's pain, and that hurts. And so Rachel's question in her victim impact statement is completely appropriate and completely biblical. How much are these little girls worth? I ask a different question. It's the same question, but it just expands that a little bit farther. How much is your neighbor worth? You see, I think we get caught in this rut, and I include myself in this. We get caught in this rut as Christians, and we become complacent, and we say, there's always tomorrow. There's always tomorrow. I'll talk to my neighbor tomorrow. I'll share the gospel tomorrow. And so we meet people with platitudes, and we give them, how are your day going? And, all these interactions that don't really matter. How are you doing? Oh, good, fine. Oh, how are you? Fine. And then we just move on. Or we form relationships with people that have no depth to them. They have no Jesus in them. And every single day, every single one of us who's sitting here interacts with someone who doesn't know Christ, and we don't bring up Jesus Christ to them. So my question is, how much is your neighbor worth? Are they worth sharing the gospel with? Are they worth listening to their pain and their struggles? Because that's the one complaint that people like Rachel and all these other victims have, is that Christians don't want to hear this part of our life. They don't want to hear the pain and the hurt and the sorrow and the disappointment and the abuse and the wickedness and all this bad stuff that's going on in my life. Christians put up a wall and they say, well, you just need more faith. And so they cover up the parts of our lives that Jesus came to redeem. Isn't that ironic? People cover up the parts of, Christians cover up the parts of our lives that Christ came to redeem. He came to redeem the ugliness, the brokenness, the hurt, the pain, the sorrow, the disappointment. He came to redeem that. And so again, I ask the question, how much is your neighbor worth? Is there a sense of urgency? Are we talking to our neighbors right now? Today, when we go out of here, are we going to talk to our neighbors about Jesus Christ? Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 10. Mike already read this for us. I'm going to go back and reread it. I love how he starts that. It says 6. That threw me off. It's actually verse 1. It's just labeled wrong. Listen to this. Paul says, working together with him. With who? With Christ. Working together with him. Paul's not out there, I need to go out and I need to reach people and I need to... Paul's not saying that. Paul says, you know what? Together, working with him. I am yoked with Jesus Christ. I am working together with him. Then we appeal to you not to receive the grace of God in vain. Don't you dare take the grace of God for vain. Don't you dare say, yeah, I was once this person, I was redeemed, and so now I'm going to be complacent, and I'm going to just kick back, and I'm going to enjoy my new faith. Paul says, don't you dare receive the grace of God in vain, for he says, in a favorable time, I listened to you. I love that. In a favorable time, I listened to you. And in a day of salvation, I have helped you. Isn't that amazing? Those are the words of Christ. In a favorable time, I listened to you. I sat down, and we see this in Jesus' ministry. He sits down with people and he listens to them. That's what separated him from all the other religious leaders of his day. Jesus sat down and he not only taught people, he listened to them. He validated their pain. He validated their brokenness, and he came to redeem it. In a day of salvation, I have helped you. And Paul says, behold, now is the favorable time. Not tomorrow, not yesterday, not I should have, I would have, I could have. If only I had reached more people in my life. I'm 67 years old, and I just wish I would have reached more people. Paul says, no. The past isn't the time. The future's not the time. Now is the favorable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. Well, if I just inch my way into people's lives and work and establish trust in this relationship, and maybe 15 years down the road, they might see the goodness of Christ. Paul says, no, now's the time of salvation. How much is your neighbor worth? Are we telling people right now is the time that you can find healing? Now is the day of salvation. Paul says, we put no obstacle in anyone's way, so that no fault may be found with our ministry. We don't create a ministry that tells people no. See, the gospel is always yes. I love this. I experienced this when I was out in California last weekend. Man, the leadership team gets this. I heard like 7 different requests by the lead minister when I was there, and the other church leaders were just like, okay. I was like, like, we're not used to that. Jesus says the gospel is a yes gospel. We say yes to extending hope to people and healing and salvation. Now is the time. There's this sense of urgency. And so Paul says, in our ministry, we put no obstacle in people's way. You won't find red tape. So that no fault may be found with our ministry, but as servants of God. We just sung the song, Lord, make me a servant. I put that song in here on purpose. All of these songs I pick the songs each week to correspond with the sermon. They're picked for a purpose. Lord, make me a servant. Because my tendency, true confession time, my tendency is not to be a servant. My tendency is to say, I just want to kick back. And like, I've been daydreaming about this hot tub for like 8 years now. I want to build this hot tub. I have it all mapped out in my head. It's going to be made of fieldstone, and I've looked at pictures, and like, I want this hot tub so bad because I just want to like come to my house and kick back and just, you know, after all, I need me time, right? That's my tendency. But we need to be singing that song and praying this prayer, Lord, make me a servant. Make me a servant. Make me a servant. Lord, make me like you. Paul says, as servants of God, we commend ourselves in every way by great endurance. Does anybody ever get tired? All the time. Paul says, we commended ourselves to you, church. Corinthians, we commended ourselves to you in great endurance. We kept going and going and going and going. In afflictions, in hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labors, sleepless nights, hunger. By the way, I've seen the lists of why people are leaving the church in mass. And none of these things are on that checklist. Paul says, we endured all of this for your sake. Hunger by purity. Anybody ever try to be pure? You ever try to remain pure? You ever try to maintain pure thoughts? You ever try to maintain pure thoughts when somebody's standing in front of you who you don't really like? Paul says, by purity and knowledge, patience, kindness, the Holy Spirit. I love this little clarifier. Genuine love. Genuine love. By truthful speech and by the power of God, and I love this line, it's why I underlined it, with the weapons of righteousness. You know, the very foundation of God is righteousness and justice. We do the things that we do because it's right. As Rachael Denhollander said in her statement, she said, I kept pushing this not because it was the easy thing to do, but because it was the right thing to do. Righteousness requires us to reach into our armor. And Paul says these are weapons. Righteousness are these weapons. I came with these weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, through honor and dishonor, through slander and praise. Well, he was saying something bad about me, and I'm going to not go there anymore. Paul says, we were slandered for your sake. We were praised for your sake. We endured all of this. We commended ourselves to you. You know why? Because Paul and his companions knew how much their neighbors were worth. Was Paul disappointed in Corinth? Have you read the first letter to the Corinthians? Was Paul let down? Was Paul ashamed? Was Paul angry? Was Paul disappointed? Was Paul forceful when he wrote his letter because of all these stupid mistakes that the people were making in Corinth? Nod your head like this. Yes. Then why did he write the second letter, and why was Paul so adamant that he wanted to go back to Corinth and he wanted to spend time with, it's interesting language Paul uses, my brothers and sisters. See, Paul didn't say, well, you're not, not my people. Paul didn't say that. Paul calls them brothers and sisters. Paul commended them. He went through all this stuff for a group of people who were complete misfits. He goes on. He's not even done. We are treated as impostors and yet are true, as unknown and yet well known, as dying and behold, we live, as punished and yet not killed. I love that too. We're punished to the point where we feel dead. Do you ever reach that point? I've never reached that point. I'll be honest. I've never reached a point where I felt dead. Paul did. We are punished to the point where we feel dead. We are close to death, and yet we're not killed. We're not there yet. They didn't quite kill us yet. As sorrowful, yet always rejoicing. As poor, yet making many rich. As having nothing, yet possessing everything. So my question again is, how much is your neighbor worth? Are we willing to commend ourselves in all of these ways that Paul just mentioned? And if not, perhaps we better reevaluate the worth of our neighbors whom Christ gave his life for. If there's anybody this morning who has any prayer needs, or anybody who has not yet taken that step to put Christ on in baptism, I invite you to come up. Tex is in the back. Bob is away today, but Tex will be back there. We will be happy to pray for you, to pray with you, to pray over you, and just to encourage you to go out today and talk with your neighbors and share Jesus. Let's stand and sing.